Chloe's late nights were becoming a habit, and the excuse was always the same: work. Until that night. On some dark impulse, I drove to her office building downtown. The entire skyscraper was a black silhouette against the bruised, purple sky. Only the security desk in the lobby was lit. "Chloe Miller?" The guard looked up from his crossword, confused.
"Nah, she clocked out at 6 on the dot."
I stood in the biting November wind, the cold light of my phone illuminating my frozen face. "Still at it?" I asked when she picked up, my voice a dry rasp.
"Yeah, almost done. You go ahead and sleep?"
she said. There was a faint, breathless catch in her voice she couldn't quite hide. The dial tone was a spike in my ear. A lie. A cold, naked lie. My heart felt like it was squeezed by an invisible hand, then abruptly released, leaving a hollow ache behind. I got back in the car. The engine was still running, the heater blasting, but it couldn't touch the chill seeping into my bones. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight the plastic groaned. Where was she? Who was she with? 1,000 questions slammed around inside my head like a pack of rabid animals. I stomped on the gas. The car shot forward like an arrow, tires screaming against the asphalt. I drove aimlessly through the city, the neon glow of Times Square and Midtown flashing across the windshield, distorting my reflection into a twisted mask. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a walk-up in a grittier part of Hell's Kitchen. A single fluorescent sign glowed faintly in the dark. Frank's Investigations. "I want you to tail my wife, Chloe Miller." I dropped a stack of hundreds on Frank's greasy, cluttered desk. My voice was as cold as ice. "Every detail, especially anyone she has been seeing." Frank lifted his heavy eyelids. His cloudy eyes glanced at the cash, then settled on my face.
"Sure thing, Mr. Miller. I'll be in touch."
He gathered the money slowly, his movements numb and practiced, the way a man who's seen it all 100 times before moves. The days that followed were a slow, dull blade carving me up inside. Chloe still came home late, a phantom scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to her clothes, her eyes always avoiding mine. "Project still in crunch mode?" I asked from across the dinner table, watching her stare down into her soup.
"Yeah, it is a killer,"
she mumbled, not looking up, stirring the bowl with her spoon. "Take care of yourself." My voice was flat, devoid of emotion.
"I know,"
she replied, the dismissal clear in her tone. A week later, Frank called.
"Mr. Miller, got something for you."
His voice, filtered through the phone, was calm, the sound of a job done. I sat in my parked car, watching the river of traffic flow past, my fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. "Tell me."
The subject, Ms. Chloe Miller, has been in frequent contact with a male individual for the past month. Name's Julian Vance.
Frank paused, the sound of shuffling papers in the background.
Vance is 35, Ivy League grad, just back in the States 2 months ago, after a long stint in finance abroad. He is a senior executive at a major private equity firm. He and Ms. Miller were at Columbia together. Their relationship was, let's say, significant back then.
Her old flame, the one that got away. The words were like poison-tipped icicles driving into my brain. "The proof!" My voice was stretched taut.
Photos, video, hotel receipts, GPS tracking, the whole 9 yards.
Frank said, his tone unchanging.
Their favorite spots are a high-end restaurant in the West Village called Aura, and the Meridian Hotel on the Jersey waterfront.
"Email it to me." I hung up. My phone lit up moments later with a new email notification. I opened it. The first photo stole the breath from my lungs. Under the hazy glow of a street lamp, Chloe was walking beside a man in a stylish, expensive-looking trench coat. He was turned slightly toward her, a gentle smile on his face, one hand resting naturally on the small of her back. Chloe was looking up at him, and her expression, it was a look I hadn't seen in a very, very long time. A look of pure, radiant adoration. It was something I once had, now buried under years of dust. The next photo was taken through the window of a private room at Aura. Through the decorative glass, Julian was lifting a piece of food with his fork, blowing on it gently before holding it to Chloe's lips. She smiled and accepted it, a faint blush on her cheeks. The one after that was from the underground parking garage of the Meridian Hotel. Julian's arm was wrapped around Chloe's waist as they walked intimately toward the elevator bank. The timestamp was a glaring, brutal confirmation. It was from the night she told me she was working late. The last attachment was a blurry, 10-second video clip, clearly shot from down the hall of the hotel. A door opened. Julian guided Chloe inside, and just before the door closed, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. She didn't pull away. She leaned into him closer. The phone screen cast a pale, sickly light on my bloodless face. My stomach churned, and the bitter taste of rust filled my throat. Anger? Yes, it was there, a river of lava searing through my veins, burning away every last shred of reason. But stronger than the anger was a cold, profound humiliation. The feeling of being played for a complete fool, of being treated like garbage. I was the idiot, the clueless husband who worried about her working too hard, who told her to take care of herself while she was in another man's arms. Ha! A short, dry laugh escaped my throat, sounding alien and disturbing in the silence of the car. I switched off the phone. The screen went dark, swallowing the damning images. But it was too late. They were already seared onto my retinas, branded into my mind like a white-hot iron. Chloe. Julian. Fine. Just fine. I started the car. The engine roared to life, and I merged back into the city's endless flow. The neon lights still flashed, but reflected in my eyes. They were cold, calculating, illuminating nothing but a barren wasteland of hate. The game was just beginning, and everything you owe me, I'm going to take back, with interest, in a way that will hurt you the most. The evidence was a cold serpent coiled in my phone, its venom seeping into my heart. I sat in my home office, the monitor's glow casting a sterile light on my expressionless face. My fingers tapped a monotonous rhythm on the keyboard. Julian Vance. The name was the only prey in my search bar. An elite professional, polished by Wall Street, now the director of U.S. investments at Polaris Capital. His LinkedIn profile was a blinding resume of success. In photos on his social media, he was the picture of confidence, making witty remarks at cocktail parties, looking philanthropic and poised at charity galas. A perfect predator, cloaked in the tailored suit of the elite. Polaris Capital. I murmured, my eyes sharp as a scalpel. The firm was a rising star, specializing in biotech and AI, with several major projects reportedly in a critical fundraising stage. As the face of their U.S. operations, Julian was the driving force behind them. His reputation, his career, everything he was so proud of, it was all tied to this. Perfect. I closed the browser and picked up my phone, dialing a number I hadn't called in years.
Yo, Ethan, to what do I owe the honor?
A cheerful voice boomed from the other end. It was my old college roommate, Ryan. He was a shark in the financial world now, connected with eyes and ears everywhere.
Ryan, I need a favor. Look into someone for me, Julian Vance, at Polaris Capital.
I set my voice flat.
I want everything, especially any creative accounting on the projects he is managing.
There was a 2-second pause. Ryan's voice dropped.
Ethan, what are you getting into? That guy's a big deal. He has got friends in high places.
It is personal,
I said bluntly.
Don't worry, I'll cover your fee and any expenses. You know the drill.
All right, man. For you, I'll see what I can dig up.
Ryan sighed.
But this kind of deep dive takes time and it is risky. He might hear the whispers.
Be discreet. I can wait.
After hanging up, the only sound in the office was the low hum of the central air. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. To destroy a man like Julian Vance, a man who valued his reputation more than his life, the kill shot wasn't a bullet. It was public ruin. It was yanking him down from his pedestal and grinding his face into the mud until everything he'd built became a laughingstock. That required patience. It required a cold, invisible net. A few days later, Chloe had another late night at the office. She opened the door quietly, slipped off her shoes, carrying that faint, telltale scent of an expensive restaurant and a trace of aftershave. An aftershave that wasn't mine. You're back, I said. I was sitting on the living room sofa in the dark, with only the dim, yellow glow of a floor lamp pooling around me. She jumped, her shoulders tensing.
Oh, you're still awake?
Waiting for you. I looked up, my gaze landing calmly on her face. Her makeup was flawless, but there was a weariness in her eyes she couldn't hide, and something else. The lingering, satisfied laziness of fulfilled desire. That subtle detail was a needle in my eye. Is the project going well? I asked, taking a sip from the glass of ice water on the coffee table.
It is. It is fine. Just exhausting.
She avoided my eyes, placing her purse on the console table by the door with stiff, deliberate movements.
I'm going to take a shower.
Okay. I set the glass down. The sound of it clicking against the wood was sharp and loud. She hurried toward the bathroom, as if fleeing a threat. I listened to the sound of the shower running, my expression hardening, my eyes growing colder and deeper. Once the seed of revenge is planted, it thrives on a diet of pure hatred. Chloe, did you really think your lies were seamless? Did you really think you could keep basking in the warmth of Julian's perfect world? I will make you watch as the fragile, false reality you cherish shatters into a million pieces right before your eyes. I will make you taste what it's like to be pushed into the abyss by the one person you thought you could trust. The water stopped. Chloe emerged in her pajamas, her wet hair draped over her shoulders.
You should get some sleep.
She said, glancing at me. Her eyes were a complex mix of guilt she couldn't quite conceal and a growing, cold distance. Right. I stood up and walked toward my office. I've got a little more work to do. As we passed each other, I smelled the clean scent of her body wash, but I couldn't feel a trace of warmth from her. Only a cold, calculated void. The office door clicked shut behind me. I opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life again. An email from Ryan was sitting in my inbox. The subject line read, Julian Vance, preliminary file. I clicked it open. A dense wall of text and attachments filled the screen. I read every word, every line, as if studying a meticulously prepared death sentence. Julian's resume was indeed impressive, but Ryan was a pro. He'd already found some interesting cracks beneath the polished surface. At his previous firm on Wall Street, he'd been peripherally involved in a minor insider trading scandal. While no direct evidence ever stuck to him, the timing of his departure was highly suspicious. Since returning to the U.S. and joining Polaris, his investment decisions on several key projects showed a clear pattern of funneling resources, channeling prime opportunities to a handful of small, obscure shell corporations with questionable credentials. One of them, a company called Oceanic Tech, had laughably little registered capital, yet had received massive, repeated cash infusions from Polaris. And the beneficial owner of Oceanic Tech seemed to have very close personal ties to Julian Vance. Oceanic Tech, I whispered the name, a cold smile forming on my lips. The fox was showing its tail. This was just the tip of the iceberg, but it was enough to pry open a crack and let the cold light of reality shine in. I picked up my phone and dialed another number. Hello, Mr. Peterson. It is Ethan Miller. Yes, I have something I need your help with. I need you to prepare a few documents. My voice was calm and steady in the silent office, methodical, stripped of all emotion. A motion to freeze all marital assets. A formal request for a complete list of every bank account, brokerage account, and real estate holding under Chloe's name. And a first draft of a divorce settlement.
Mr. Miller, are you sure you want to initiate these proceedings now? This could be...
Peterson's voice was professionally cautious. I'm sure. I cut him off, my tone absolute. Do exactly as I've asked, as soon as possible.
Understood.
I hung up and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The torrent of hatred in my chest seemed to find a small, cold release in this concrete action. Chloe, you threw away years of marriage for your old flame without a second thought, trampling on my trust. So tell me, are you and your perfect Mr. Vance ready to pay the price? The net I've been weaving is now in place. Its cold, invisible threads are silently, inexorably tightening around your necks. Ryan was faster than I'd expected. A week later, a thick manila envelope was in my hands. He didn't stick around for small talk, just clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes tinged with concern.
Ethan, be careful. This Vance guy is no joke. He has probably got powerful people behind him.
Thanks, Ryan, I said, feeling the weight of the envelope. The cold fire inside me burned brighter. I know what I'm doing. Back in my office, I locked the door. The contents of the envelope spread across my desk like a prosecutor's evidence board. Beyond the shady financial ties between Oceanic Tech and Julian, there was something even more explosive. Several grainy but clear security camera stills, time-stamped late at night. Julian and a pot-bellied, greasy-looking middle-aged man were entering a private club, one after the other. The man was a key decision-maker at a major national bank, the one in charge of approving loans for tech ventures. Ryan's note was brief. Vance meeting with Wagner, VP of Commercial Lending, at the Pavilion. Likely greasing the wheels for a loan for Polaris's Genesis project. Wagner has a taste for discreet gifts, especially rare books and antique maps. Discreet gifts. I repeated the phrase, my fingertip tracing the outline of Julian's face on the photo, a face that looked utterly phony in the dim light. The man was a complete hypocrite. Another file contained several technically processed printouts of emails. The sender's address was redacted, but the language and context were damning. In them, Julian used what seemed like professional jargon to implicitly threaten a small biotech startup, pressuring them to accept Polaris's draconian investment terms. He hinted that if they refused, their pending applications for several key patents might run into unexpected obstacles. At the end of one email, he casually mentioned the founder's daughter, who was studying abroad, with a tone of concern that was bone-chilling. Extortion, threats, and coercion. This was the man Chloe saw as a charming, brilliant knight in shining armor. I took out my phone and photographed every single document, making sure each one was crystal clear. Then, I created a new, encrypted, anonymous email account. For the recipients, I entered the public tip line addresses for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower, and the investigative desks of 3 major financial news publications known for their deep-dive journalism. The subject line, Formal Whistleblower Report, Polaris Capital's Julian Vance implicated in embezzlement, bribery, unfair competition, and coercion. In a body of email, I wrote nothing. I simply attached the photos, one by one, with cold, calm precision. Let the evidence speak for itself. Click. Send. As the message send confirmation appeared on the screen, a cold, metallic taste of satisfaction filled my mouth for the first time. This was just the first match strike, the first flame to lick at the fortress Julian had so carefully built. Next, it was Chloe's turn. I wanted her to see with her own eyes just how rotten and fragile the love she had betrayed her marriage for truly was. A few days later, on a normal Saturday afternoon, Chloe was home for once. She was curled up on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a listless, distracted look on her face. I walked over with a glass of water and sat in the armchair across from her.
I haven't heard you mention that Genesis project lately. Wasn't it a huge deal?
I asked casually, my eyes fixed on a mindless reality show blaring from the TV. Chloe's thumb stopped moving on her phone screen. Her eyes flickered.
Oh, that! It is still moving forward. Just hit a few snags.
Snags. I took a sip of water, my tone neutral.
I thought Director Vance was a superstar. Are there really snags he can't handle?
I deliberately emphasized the words Director Vance. Chloe's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide with suspicion and a hint of panic.
How did you know he is in charge of it?
He is the golden boy at Polaris, isn't he? You see his name in the financial news all the time,
I said, a humorless smile touching my lips.
So, he is in trouble?
Chloe's expression shifted. She put down her phone and sat up straight, her voice taking on a defensive edge she probably didn't even notice.
It is not big trouble. It is just some jealous little people are trying to stir things up. They filed some baseless complaints against him.
Complaints?
I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise.
About what? Is it serious?
Of course not.
Chloe's voice shot up, her tone agitated, desperate to defend him.
It is all lies, Julian. He has always done things by the book. It is definitely a smear campaign from a competitor.
Seeing her so worked up, so completely undone over another man, sent a fresh wave of cold hatred surging through me. But my face remained a mask of calm, even showing the right amount of concern.
Is that so? Well, that is good. But with all the new regulations, even a baseless complaint can be a headache, right? An investigation alone can damage a reputation, especially for someone in his position.
I spoke slowly, each word a poison-tipped dart aimed precisely at her deepest anxieties. Chloe's face fell. She bit her lip, her gaze darting around the room, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt.
Yeah, it is causing some problems.
She admitted, her voice dropping, laced with frustration.
There are rumors flying around the office. He has been under a lot of pressure.
Pressure. I set my glass down on the coffee table. The sound it made in the quiet room was sharp and loud. And you? I looked directly at her, my gaze flat but piercing, as if it could see right through her.
You've been telling me you're working late every night. You must be under a lot of pressure, too. Are you helping him carry his?
The air in the room froze solid. Chloe went rigid, as if struck by lightning. The color drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly white. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Her expression was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror and the shock of being exposed.
I...
She stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence.
Chloe,
I cut her off, my voice low but hard as steel.
We've been married for 7 years. 7 years. That is long enough for me to recognize a lot of things, including a lie.
I stood up, looking down at her face now completely devoid of color.
You're on your own.
With that, I turned and walked to my office, not giving her a second glance. Behind me, there was only a dead, suffocating silence. I knew the seed of fear had now been firmly planted in her heart, and this was only the beginning. Let her stew in her suspicion and anxiety. Let her watch as the perfect man she worshipped walks step by step into the grave she helped dig. The fuse was lit. The explosion wasn't far off. 4. My office had become my fortress. The moment the heavy oak door closed, it sealed me off from the sickening world outside. On my laptop screen was the latest email from Peterson, my lawyer. Attached were a detailed list of our assets and a draft of a divorce settlement, its language precise, its terms brutal. I reviewed it line by line, my eyes cold. The house we bought together, the cars, the stocks, the mutual funds, every traceable marital asset was listed in stark detail. The core of the agreement was simple. Chloe would leave with nothing. Citing her gross misconduct, adultery, and cohabitation with another man, she would waive all claims to the division of marital property. It was all there in black and white, clinical and merciless. I picked up the phone and called Peterson.
I've reviewed the agreement. It is fine,
I said, my voice sharp in the quiet room.
Add one more clause. If the wife contests the terms of this agreement or the division of assets, the burden of proof is on her to demonstrate that she is not at fault. Failure to do so will be considered an automatic forfeiture of all claims.
Understood, Mr. Miller.
Peterson replied, his tone professionally cool.
That clause will effectively block any future attempts to challenge the settlement. I'll revise it and send it back for your final approval shortly.
Good. After hanging up, I leaned back and closed my eyes, leaving with nothing. Chloe, what will your face look like when you see this? Shock? Rage? Desperate pleading? The thought of her potential breakdown sent a twisted tendril of satisfaction coiling around my heart. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I wanted her to be left with absolutely nothing, including the sham of a romance she held so dear. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. It was just 3 words. The wind's picking up. I immediately opened my browser and went to a major financial news site. Sure enough, buried in a less prominent section, a new headline had appeared. Polaris Capital Executive J. Vance under investigation after whistleblower complaint alleges multiple violations. Regulators now involved. The article was carefully worded, using J. Vance allegedly and monitoring the situation, but anyone in the industry would know exactly who it was about. It was just a signal, a sign of the coming storm. I closed the page, a cold smirk touching my lips. The wind was picking up indeed. Julian, your good old days are over. For the next few days, the atmosphere at home was glacial. Chloe became eerily silent, her eyes constantly darting away from mine. She had dark circles under her eyes and looked like a startled animal, ready to bolt at the slightest noise. The late nights stopped. She came home on time every day, but she was a ghost, a walking shell of a person. She tried to talk to me, her eyes filled with a timid, pleading hope.
Ethan, can we talk?
She finally worked up the courage at dinner, her voice hoarse and raw. I put down my fork and looked at her, my expression as still and deep as a frozen lake. About what?
About us.
She said, avoiding my gaze, her fingers nervously twisting the tablecloth.
I know I've been upsetting you lately.
Upsetting me! I cut her off, my voice unreadable. Chloe! You think I'm just upset? She flinched, her head sinking lower.
Me and Julian.
She began, her voice barely a whisper.
We're just old friends. We've been working together on the project. There is nothing.
Nothing? I repeated the word softly, and then I laughed. It was a quiet, chilling sound that made Chloe's head snap up, the blood draining from her face, her eyes filled with terror. Chloe! I leaned forward slightly, my gaze a cold probe boring into her eyes from across the table. How was the food at Aura? And the view from the penthouse suite at the Meridian? Better than the view from home? Each name was a hammer blow, striking her nerves with brutal force. Her pupils constricted. Her lips began to tremble violently. Her face was as white as a sheet.
You...
She sounded like she was being strangled, able to form only broken syllables as overwhelming terror stole her breath. I what? I leaned back in my chair, watching her teeter on the edge of complete breakdown. I followed you. I had you investigated.
No.
She shook her head, tears instantly welling in her eyes, tears of fear.
Ethan, please, let me explain.
Explain! I cut her off coldly, my voice suddenly rising, edged with months of repressed fury and icy contempt. Explain how you were in another man's bed when you were supposed to be working late! Explain how you used the money I earned to buy expensive gifts to impress your old flame! Explain how you enjoyed the security of our marriage while chasing a cheap, pathetic affair you called love! My voice wasn't a roar, but every word was a poison-tipped icicle, striking her where she was most vulnerable. Chloe shattered. She collapsed back into her chair, her hands flying up to cover her face as her shoulders heaved with suppressed, desperate sobs.
No, it is not what you think.
Shut up! I snapped, my eyes like daggers. Your tears, your excuses, they're worthless to me now. They just make me sick. I stood up, towering over her as she curled into a weeping, pathetic ball. I felt no pity, only a cold, visceral disgust and a near-cruel sense of triumph. Save the act, Chloe! Your performance is over! Get ready to pay for what you've done! I turned and left the dining room without another look. Behind me, her suppressed sobs finally erupted into a full-blown, gut-wrenching wail. The sound was raw with terror, regret, and utter despair. To me, it was music. This was only the overture. The most dramatic movements were yet to come. The storm around Julian was gathering speed. Ryan's texts came one after another. Bank put the Genesis loan on hold. Wagner is under internal review. That biotech startup you mentioned went to the press with the emails. They didn't name names, but everyone knows who they're talking about. Things are getting tense inside Polaris. The board is furious with Julian. Rumor is they're about to put him on administrative leave to control the damage. Administrative leave? Too easy. I picked up my phone and opened the encrypted, anonymous email account. A few unread messages were waiting for me from reporters at different financial publications, cautiously asking for more details, more proof. I let out a cold laugh. The fire was hot enough. It was time to add the gasoline. I opened a reply and attached a single file. The complete, Unredacted screenshot of the email, where Julian threatened the biotech founder and inquired about his daughter. This time, I left everything visible. Julian's official work email address was right there, clear as day, in the center field. Click. Send. Here's a little gift for you, Julian. Hope you like it. Enjoy the eve of your destruction. 5. The Polaris Capital Annual Investors Gala, the firm's most glamorous event of the year, was in full swing in the grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant but cold light over the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne, perfume, and the sound of hollow, practiced networking. I stood in a quiet corner, a glass of champagne in my hand, a detached observer of this elaborate pageant of the elite. Julian Vance, impeccably dressed, was still one of the stars of the show. He moved through the crowd with the flawless, confident smile of a man on top of the world, shaking hands, laughing, clinking glasses. But if you looked closely, you could see the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion he couldn't quite hide in his eyes. He was a string pulled taut to its breaking point. Chloe was there, too. Was she representing a valued partner? Or was she there as Julian's personal guest? She wore an elegant champagne-colored dress, her makeup a perfect mask of composure, and she stayed close to Julian's side. But her smile was brittle, her eyes darted nervously, and she kept glancing at him like a frightened rabbit. She saw me in the corner. Her body went rigid. The color drained from her face as she quickly looked away, her fingers clutching her small handbag. Fear. Good. Her fear was exactly what I wanted. The gala reached its peak when the chairman of Polaris took the stage to deliver a rousing speech about the company's bright future. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Julian stood near the front, clapping with a smile, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Chloe stood just behind him, her hands patting together softly, her gaze vacant. This was it. I set down my glass, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Then I walked toward the side of the ballroom, where the A/V technicians were managing the sound and lighting from a small booth. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm and authoritative, easily cutting through the background music. I smiled the easy, confident smile of someone who belonged there. "I'm a friend of Julian Vance's. He asked me to give you this flash drive. It is a last-minute video update on the Genesis project. It is crucial that it plays right now." I held out a generic black flash drive, my tone casual but firm, leaving no room for questions. The young technician looked at me, then over at Julian, who was busy accepting congratulations. Clearly, the name Julian Vance and my confident demeanor were enough.
Right now, the chairman just finished.
He hesitated. "Julian's specific instructions. It is critical for the next round of funding." I pressed, my gaze sharpening. "Any delays are on you. You want to be responsible for that." The two techs exchanged a nervous glance. The last thing they wanted was to anger a senior executive.
Okay, sure.
One of them took the drive and plugged it into the master laptop. A few seconds later, the chairman's speech ended to another round of applause. The MC stepped up to the microphone, beaming.
Thank you for those inspiring words. And now, let's...
He never finished his sentence. With a loud click, every light in the grand ballroom suddenly went out. But the enormous projection screen behind the stage blazed to life. The entire room was plunged into darkness, pierced only by the screen's blinding white light. A ripple of confusion and surprise went through the crowd.
What is going on? Power outage. What is this?
The next second, the image that appeared on the screen silenced every voice in the room. A dead, suffocating quiet fell over the gala. Playing on the screen, in high definition, was the video from the Meridian Hotel hallway. Julian, with his arm wrapped around Chloe's waist, walking intimately toward a hotel room door. He opened the door, leaned down, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss on her forehead. Chloe, melting into his embrace, her face a picture of blissful surrender. The timestamp glowed in the corner, a brutal, undeniable fact.
Ah!
A short, sharp scream of pure terror and shame cut through the silence. It was Chloe. She shoved Julian away as if he were on fire, her hands flying to her face as her body trembled uncontrollably. She looked like she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. The giant screen was a merciless mirror, exposing their sordid affair to hundreds of their peers, clients, and colleagues. The technicians scrambled to cut the feed, but the system seemed to be frozen. The image of their embrace stubbornly burned onto the screen.
Turn it off! Turn it off now!
Julian's voice was a raw, furious roar. His handsome face was twisted into an ugly snarl, every trace of his smooth composure gone. He lunged toward the A/V booth, shoving people out of his way, desperately trying to yank the drive out to kill the power to the laptop. But the screen remained lit, the image searing itself into the memory of everyone present. The ballroom exploded.
Oh my God, is that Director Vance? And that woman, isn't she from one of their partner firms? I thought she was married. An affair. And they're outing him like this. This is insane. Wow, he always seemed like such a stand-up guy. Well, this is going to be a PR nightmare for Polaris.
Whispers, gasps, scornful laughs, and titillated murmurs swelled into a tidal wave, crashing down on Julian and Chloe. Hundreds of eyes, like spotlights, were fixed on them, filled with shock, contempt, amusement, and morbid curiosity. Julian, his efforts futile, slammed his fists on the unresponsive console, a vein throbbing in his temple. His face cycled through shades of red, purple, and finally, a deathly gray. He spun around, his bloodshot eyes scanning the crowd like a cornered animal, until they locked onto me. Across the chaotic room, our gazes collided. The fury, the disbelief, the utter shock in his eyes finally coalesced into a look of pure, venomous hatred. He understood. It was me. I met his glare, slowly raised my champagne flute in a mock toast, and allowed a cold, triumphant, and utterly unapologetic smile to spread across my face. In that instant, Julian's sanity snapped.
Ethan, it was you! You did this!
He bellowed, a primal scream of rage. Forgetting everything, he charged through the crowd like a maddened bull, heading straight for me. People scattered with shouts of alarm. He reached me, his eyes crimson, and threw a wild punch aimed at my face.
You bastard! I'll kill you!
I was ready. I shifted my weight, sidestepping the clumsy, rage-fueled blow. At the same time, my right hand shot out and clamped down on his wrist. My fingers were like a vice, squeezing down hard. A strangled cry of pain escaped him as he felt his bones grind together. His forward momentum was stopped cold. Director Vance! I leaned in close, my voice a low, cold hiss for his ears only, my breath ghosting over his contorted face. Enjoying the surprise. Your carefully crafted image. Your precious career. The woman you stole. It is all gone now. How does it feel? Every word was a poisoned dagger twisting in his heart.
You!
He was shaking with fury, his eyes bulging as he tried to swing with his other hand. I didn't give him the chance. I shoved his trapped wrist forward while simultaneously hooking my foot behind his ankle. Thrown off balance, Julian stumbled forward, flailing wildly. Thud! He went down hard, sprawling face first onto the floor. His expensive tuxedo was stained with spilled wine and dirt, his perfect hair a mess. He looked like a pathetic beaten dog.
Julian!
Chloe screamed, tried to rush to his side. But Julian's shame and rage had reached their peak. He struggled to his knees, saw Chloe's tear-streaked, horrified face, and saw in it the source of all his humiliation.
Get away from me! You worthless, backstabbing bitch!
He swung his arm, putting all his strength into it, and slapped her hard across the face. Crack! The sound was sharp and sickeningly loud in the momentary hush. Chloe staggered back, stunned, a bright red handprint already blooming on her cheek. She clutched her face, staring in disbelief at the man on the floor, the man who had whispered sweet nothings to her just hours ago, now looking at her with the face of a demon. Tears streamed down her face, her eyes filled with a universe of pain, shock, and disillusionment. Her perfect, gentle, brilliant knight in shining armor. With one vicious slap, he had shattered into dust. The entire ballroom was once again silent, every guest frozen, watching this unbelievable drama unfold. The cheating scandal, the public exposure, and now the abuser turning on his victim. It was better than any movie. Polaris executives looked apoplectic. Security guards finally rushed in, grabbing the still screaming Julian and hauling him away. They also escorted out the stunned, zombie-like Chloe, who walked as if her soul had been ripped from her body. A meticulously planned, high-profile gala meant to showcase the firm's power had devolved into the city's most scandalous train wreck. I stood my ground, calmly straightening the cuff of my shirt that Julian had wrinkled. I watched his departing glare, filled with impotent rage. I watched Chloe's broken, world-shattered shuffle out the door. The cold, repressed hatred that had been suffocating me for months finally found its release. An unprecedented, exhilarating, almost metallic-tasting wave of satisfaction washed over me, flooding every cell in my body. Vindication. It felt so damn good. I picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and downed it in one go. The cold liquid burned my throat, but ignited an even hotter fire within. This was just the intermission. The divorce papers were about to take center stage. The gala fiasco spread through the city's professional circles like a virus. Polaris Capital immediately suspended Julian and launched an internal investigation. The anonymous tips I had sent to the press and regulators could no longer be ignored. The truth about Oceanic Tech being a shell company used for embezzlement, the evidence of his discreet gifts to the bank executive, and worst of all, the unredacted email threatening the biotech founder that had crossed a clear legal line. The investigation intensified. Word got out that the district attorney's office was now involved. Julian Vance's name went from being synonymous with success to being a toxic punchline. As for Chloe, she had vanished. She wasn't at home. She hadn't called in sick to work, and her phone went straight to voicemail. She had simply dropped off the face of the earth. I knew where she was, hiding out in some corner, licking her wounds, probably still clinging to the pathetic hope that her shattered hero could offer her some comfort. Naive. I picked up my phone and called one of Chloe's closest friends. Ethan. Her voice was shocked, laced with an awkwardness she couldn't hide. "It is me," I said flatly. "Do me a favor and give Chloe a message. Tell her hiding won't solve anything. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at the apartment. We're settling this, for good." I paused, letting the coldness sink in. "If she doesn't show up, she'll regret it." I hung up before she could reply. The blade was poised. She wasn't getting away. The next day, at 1:50 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it. It was Chloe. In just a few days, she had transformed. Her skin was sallow, her eyes were sunken and shadowed with dark circles, and her lips were cracked and dry. She wore a wrinkled old coat, her hair was a mess, and she looked completely drained, as if her very life force had been sucked out. She kept her head down, refusing to meet my eyes, her body trembling slightly. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. My tone was as neutral as if I were speaking to a delivery person. She flinched like a startled animal, then scurried inside, her steps unsteady. On the coffee table in the living room, a thick manila envelope and a pen were placed prominently. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the sofa. She sat down stiffly, her hands wringing the fabric of her coat, her knuckles white. I picked up the envelope, pulled out the documents inside, and laid them on the table in front of her. The heading was in stark, black letters, Divorce Settlement Agreement. Chloe's body jolted as if she'd been burned by the words. "Read it." I sat in the armchair opposite her, crossing my legs, my posture relaxed, but my gaze sharp, locked onto her like a hawk. Her hands trembled as she picked up the papers. She read slowly, painfully. As her eyes moved down the page, her breathing grew ragged, and her face grew paler. When she reached the clauses stating, "Whereas the wife, Chloe Miller, has committed acts of gross marital misconduct, adultery, and cohabitation, and the wife voluntarily waives all claims to marital assets, agreeing to a zero-sum settlement." She let out a sharp gasp, and her head snapped up.
Zero sum. Leave with nothing.
Her voice was a shrill, incredulous shriek.
Ethan, you can't do this.
Can't I? I leaned forward, my eyes boring into hers. I can! Because while you were in Julian Vance's bed, you were living on my money! Because you used my credit cards to buy him expensive gifts! Because you, Chloe, completely and utterly betrayed our marriage! Every word was a lash, striking her again and again.
I didn't use your money.
She tried to argue, but her voice was weak, pathetic. No! I laughed coldly and pulled another stack of papers from the envelope, tossing them onto the table in front of her. These are your credit card statements for the last 3 months. The charges at Aura, the hotel bills from the Meridian, and this! I pointed to several large charges. This $3,800 charge at the Tom Ford Boutique on Madison. What was that for? A belt, a wallet, cufflinks for whom? Your old friend Julian. And look at this. I threw down a bank statement. The $20,000 you wired to him, with the note, Project Loan. Chloe, do you take me for a fool? The documents were a cold, hard wall of proof closing in on her. Chloe stared at the familiar charges, the undeniable transfers, and her face went from white to gray, finally settling into a mask of hollow despair. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. That money is marital property, I said, my voice low and precise. You disposed of it without my consent for illicit purposes. To maintain your affair, I have every right to get it back. This agreement, I tapped the papers on the table, is me being generous. It only requires you to forfeit your claim to what is left. As for the money you've already spent, given away, wired. I paused, watching the last flicker of light die in her eyes before delivering the final, cold blow. I will be suing you for every single penny, with interest. That includes the gifts you gave him. I have all the receipts. Listen to me very carefully. Chloe, everything you took from me, everything you stole, I will make you pay it back. To the last cent. You and him. Neither of you is walking away from this. Silence. The only sound in the room was Chloe's ragged, hopeless breathing. She slumped against the sofa as if her bones had dissolved, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling as silent tears traced paths down her gaunt cheeks. Her carefully constructed world, the love and luxury she had risked everything for, had just been torn to shreds and ground into the dirt by my own hands. Sign it. I pushed the pen toward her, my voice absolute. It is your only choice. Otherwise, I have no problem submitting the video from the gala, along with all of these statements and receipts to the court. Believe me, you'll lose a lot more that way. Chloe's body was racked with tremors. She looked at the pen, then at the cold, merciless document, and finally, her desperate gaze fell upon my face. Her eyes were pleading, full of regret, pain, and maybe a last, pathetic flicker of delusion about Julian.
Ethan.
She choked out, her voice a mess of tears.
I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, for the 7 years we had.
7 years? I cut her off, laughing as if it were the funniest joke I'd ever heard, a cruel smile twisting my lips. Chloe, when you were lying in Julian's arms, did you think about our 7 years? When you were feeding me lie after lie about working late, did you think about it then? When you were spending my money on your lover, did you think about it? You want to talk about our history? Wait now! I stood up, looking down at her with nothing but cold disgust. You don't have the right! Sign the papers. Now, my voice was quiet, but it carried the crushing weight of finality, a cold blade pressed against her throat. The last of Chloe's fight drained out of her. The light in her eyes was completely extinguished, replaced by a dead, gray emptiness. She reached out a trembling hand and picked up the pen. The tip hovered over the signature line, shaking violently, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Fat tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. She closed her eyes, took a shuddering breath, and with what seemed to be the last of her strength, she signed her name to the document that sealed her fate. Chloe Miller. The 2 words were as twisted and broken as her life. The pen slipped from her numb fingers, falling silently onto the rug. She collapsed back onto the sofa, a hollowed-out shell, weeping without a sound. I picked up the agreement and inspected the signature. It was valid. I carefully put my copy away. You have 3 days to get your things out of here. After that, I'm having everything that is left thrown out. Leave your key on the table. My voice was flat, detached, as if I were dealing with a piece of old, unwanted furniture. I turned and walked toward my office without looking back. Behind me, her suppressed grief finally broke free in a raw, soul-tearing howl of absolute despair and regret. The sound was a victory march. The cold blade had fallen. The last, pathetic tie was severed. Now it was time to watch Julian's endgame. Chloe was gone by the next day. She moved out like a whisper, taking only a few old clothes and some worthless trinkets. She left behind an empty closet, a bare vanity, and a cold, solitary apartment key on the coffee table. The place that was once our home was now completely purged of her presence. Good. It was cleaner this way. My focus shifted entirely to Julian. The updates from Ryan came in a steady stream, each one like a report from a victorious battlefront.
Oceanic Tech is under full investigation. It is a total shell company, and Julian was using Polaris funds to keep it afloat. The numbers are huge. Wagner, the guy from the bank, cracked under pressure. He confessed everything about the gifts from Julian. The bribery case is airtight. But the real killer is that threatening email. Combined with his shady history on Wall Street, the DA has officially filed charges. He is looking at felony embezzlement, bribery, and possibly even extortion. Polaris issued a press release completely disavowing him. They're suing him for damages. When it rains, it pours.
Julian Vance was finished. He was no longer the brilliant, high-flying executive. He was a disgraced, soon-to-be convicted felon. His career, his reputation, his social standing, all of it had vanished overnight. For him, that was a fate worse than death. I was parked across the street from the Meridian Hotel, the place where he and Chloe had carried on their affair. I had the window cracked, and the early winter wind bit at my face. On the passenger seat was a copy of the day's Wall Street Journal. The front page story featured a grainy photo of Julian being led away by detectives, his hand shielding his face. The headline was stark. Former Polaris exec Julian Vance, indicted on multiple felony charges, faces lengthy prison sentence. I read it slowly, savoring every word, like admiring a masterpiece. Before long, a familiar figure emerged from a side entrance of the hotel. It was Julian. In a few weeks since the gala, he looked like he'd aged a decade. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled jacket. His hair was a mess, his face was covered in stubble, and his eyes were hollow and numb. He had lost all of his former swagger. He was dragging a small suitcase, his steps slow and unsteady, like a ghost haunting the scene of his downfall. He had clearly been kicked out of the hotel. With his reputation in tatters, no one wanted anything to do with him. He stood on the curb, staring blankly at the passing traffic, looking lost. The wind whipped dead leaves around his feet, adding to the picture of utter desolation. I opened my car door and got out. My dress shoes made a sharp, distinct sound on the cold pavement as I walked toward him. Julian seemed to sense my presence and looked up. When he saw it was me, his empty eyes ignited with a venomous, all-consuming hatred.
Ethan!
He spat my name, his voice a raw, hateful rasp.
You! This was all you!
He lunged at me like a cornered animal, trying to find one last fight. But the stress and humiliation of the past few weeks had taken their toll. His charge was weak, and by the time he reached me, he was just a pathetic, panting wreck fueled by impotent rage. That is right, it was me, I said calmly, standing before him, watching the anger and despair fight for dominance on his twisted face. How does it feel, Director Vance? Oh! Wait, I guess it is just Mr. Vance now, or should I say defendant?
You!
He trembled with fury, pointing a shaking finger at me.
You're a monster, a coward. You ruined me. You'll rot in hell for this.
Me? A coward? I laughed a cold, mocking sound. Julian, when you were screwing another man's wife, did you feel like a coward then? When you were embezzling funds and threatening people's families to close your deals, did you feel like a coward? Now that you've been caught, you want to point fingers. I took a step closer, my eyes like shards of ice. piercing through to the fear he couldn't hide. I ruined you? No, Julian. You ruined yourself. You couldn't keep it in your pants, and you went after a woman who wasn't yours. You were greedy, and you took money that wasn't yours. You were arrogant, and you thought you could get away with anything. All I did was lift the lid on the garbage. Can you call a life and let everyone see the filth you had hiding under that polished, expensive suit? My voice was low, but every word was a razor, carving up what was left of his shattered ego. Julian's face went from gray to a deathly white. He swayed on his feet, barely able to stand. The hatred in his eyes was being consumed by a wave of absolute terror and despair. He knew I was right. He was done. Completely and utterly done. The only thing waiting for him now was a prison cell. All his ambition, all his pride gone. And as for Chloe, I paused deliberately, enjoying the final extinguishing of the light in his eyes. She signed the divorce papers. She walked away with nothing. Do you think she is still waiting for you, pining for you? Do you think she regrets throwing her entire life away for you, a broke disgrace soon-to-be convicted felon? I leaned in, my voice a whisper of pure ice next his ear. What you stole from me, I'm making you pay back tenfold. And what you gave her, I'm making her give back piece by piece. You both owe me, and I always collect. I stepped back, no longer interested in the sight of his broken, pathetic form. I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard a raw, animalistic howl of pure, undiluted despair.
Ethan, I'll get you for this! I swear to God, I'll get you!
I got in my car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw him collapse onto the cold sidewalk, a crumpled heap of a man, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, hopeless sobs. Everything he had built was gone. The woman he had taken was gone. His future was a black hole of prison and shame. This was his end. I hit the gas, and the car merged smoothly into traffic, leaving the sound of his failure behind. The city lights glittered outside my window, but my world was now perfectly, coldly clear. Next, it was time to collect from Chloe. 8 to 3-day deadline passed. Chloe's things were gone, down to the last bobby pin. The apartment felt vast and quiet, scrubbed clean of her memory. It was better this way. Peterson, my lawyer, was ruthlessly efficient. The signed divorce agreement, combined with the mountain of evidence I provided, the hotel security stills, credit card statements, bank transfers, receipts from luxury boutiques, was irrefutable. The divorce proceedings were a formality. We stood before the clerk at the city records office. The clerk glanced at the zero-sum settlement clause, looked at the supplementary evidence I provided, shot a quick, complicated look at the gaunt, empty-eyed Chloe standing beside me, and without a word, stamped the divorce certificate. Thunk! 2 crimson-colored certificates were pushed across the counter. One for me, one for her. Chloe stared at the document that officially ended her marriage, her body trembling slightly. She didn't touch it. I picked mine up without a second glance and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. I stood up and walked away. I could hear her quiet, broken sobs behind me, but they stirred nothing in me. Walking out of the municipal building, the winter sun was bright, almost blinding. The air was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, and the cold air filled my lungs with a sense of exhilarating release. My phone rang. It was Peterson.
Mr. Miller, is it finalized?
Yes.
Excellent. We can now officially file the civil suit for the recovery of marital assets.
He said all business.
Based on the evidence you provided, Ms. Miller misappropriated marital funds for illicit purposes, namely financing her extramarital affair. The total comes to 1. Hotel and dining expenses, totaling $8,760. 2. The wire transferred to Julian Vance of $20,000. 3. Purchases of luxury goods for Mr. Vance, totaling $5,300. The grand total is $34,060. I have prepared the complaint and will file it with the court today, demanding full restitution from Ms. Miller. As for the physical gifts Mr. Vance received, since he is now the subject of a criminal investigation, the recovery of those assets will be handled by the DA's office, as part of the forfeiture process. We simply need to list them in our civil claim.
Perfect, I said, squinting into the sun. Proceed as planned.
Understood. One more thing, Mr. Miller. Ms. Miller currently has no employment or source of income, and no other assets to her name. Even after we get a judgment, enforcing it may be difficult.
I don't care. I cut him off, my voice cold. What I want is the judgment. I want her name to be legally and permanently tied to that debt. I want it hung around her neck like a millstone for the rest of her life. I want that every time she manages to catch her breath, she remembers this debt and remembers exactly what she did to earn it.
Understood, Mr. Miller.
He knew exactly what I meant. I hung up and got into my car. I didn't start it right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and found Chloe's number. I typed out a short, simple text. The court summons is on its way. $34,060. Plus interest. You owe every cent. I hit send. I imagined her receiving that message, the feeling of the ice-cold floor dropping out from under her, the final nail in her coffin of despair. I leaned back against the headrest and let out a long, slow breath. The cold, burning fire that had consumed me for months was finally beginning to die down. In its place was a feeling of clean, transparent relief. Like a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Like a deep-seated poison had finally been purged from my system. The shame of betrayal, the rage of being made a fool, the suffocating hatred. In that moment, with the divorce certificate in my pocket and that final text message sent, it all dissipated into nothing. I started the car and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, the direction of the life I once had grew smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the city skyline. Ahead of me, the road was wide open, and the sun was shining. The winter night was sharp and cold. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window of my new apartment. Below me, the city glittered, a galaxy of lights stretching to the horizon. The view was clear, and the air was free of the dust and sickening scent of the past. A new beginning. A glass of amber whiskey sat beside me, beads of condensation tracing paths down its side. On the coffee table lay the crimson divorce certificate. Next to it was the official court notice Peterson had dropped off earlier. The civil suit against Chloe for the $34,060 had been formally filed. My phone screen lit up. A message from Ryan with a news link. I opened it. The headline was simple and direct. Former Polaris Capital executive Julian Vance, formally charged on multiple felony counts. The article listed his name, followed by a long, cold string of charges: bribery, embezzlement, extortion. It was a clinical, brutal obituary for a once bright career. The comment section was a chorus of digital schadenfreude. Good riddance. He got what he deserved. Finally, some justice. I closed the link and picked up my glass. The cold whiskey burned a hot trail down my throat, chasing away the winter chill. Satisfaction. A deep, bone marrow satisfaction. It was the feeling of poison being drawn from a wound, a blocked artery suddenly clearing. Julian was facing prison, his future a wasteland of legal battles and public shame. Chloe was broke, in debt, and alone, the love and luxury she had chased turning to ash in her hands. The web of deceit they had spun had ultimately trapped them both, and I was the one who had pulled the strings. I had taken the humiliation and pain they had dealt me and returned it 100-fold. There was no emptiness, just a clean, cold, and absolute sense of victory. My phone buzzed again. Chloe's number. Her name on the screen looked like a dying insect. I watched it ring and ring and ring until it went to voicemail. A text message immediately followed. Ethan, please. I'm begging you. Let me go. I know I was wrong. I can't. I don't have that kind of money. Her words were a portrait of pure desperation. I stared at them blankly, then with a simple, deliberate motion, I dragged her contact into my block list. Her, and the entire rotten chapter of my life she represented, deleted. The world went quiet. I picked up the divorce certificate. The crimson cover felt heavy in my hands. I opened it. Inside was the photo of us from years ago, taken right after our wedding. In the picture, her smile was bright, her eyes were clear, and she was leaning against me. We were happy once. But people change. I picked up a lighter. Click. A small, blue flame flickered to life, licking at the corner of the photograph. The fire spread quickly, consuming her smiling face, incinerating a past that had already decayed. The orange glow danced in my eyes, which were cold and calm. In seconds, The photo curled into black ash and fluttered into the ashtray. Only my half remained, the edges singed and yellowed. I closed the certificate and tossed it into the back of a drawer, discarding it like a worthless relic. I raised my glass and finished the whiskey in one swallow. The burn was sharper this time, but it spread a strange warmth through my body, chasing away the last of the chill, incinerating the last of the past. I walked to the vast window and looked down at the brilliant, sprawling city, a city of infinite possibility. The wind howled outside, beating against the glass, but it couldn't penetrate the warmth and light of the room. A new life was beginning, a life without betrayal, without lies, without an enemy sleeping beside me, a future that belonged to me, Ethan Miller, and me alone.